Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're exploring something pretty radical, really, this core idea about communication.
Right. It really challenges a lot of the standard thinking, doesn't it?
It does. Is language something you kind of have to force,
Mm-hmm.
with rigid schedules, compliance,
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
Or, yeah, does it actually emerge more organically from a place where someone feels, well, fundamentally safe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our sources today, people like the developmental pediatrician Mona Delahooke and speech pathologist Jaime Hoerricks, they really dig into this.
Mm-hmm. Especially looking at gestalt language processors, GLPs, to show why sometimes that push for compliance can actually, get in the way of language.
So that's really our mission today, to unpack this argument that safety isn't just like a nice to have.
No, it's presented as the absolute precondition for real communication.
Yeah, we're contrasting those typical behavior-focused techniques,
Huh.
the laminated charts, the reward schedules,
Right.
with these concepts of softness and felt safety.
And it suggests maybe we need to stop focusing so much on what a person produces and start thinking more about how their body feels when they're trying to communicate.
Okay, so let's dive into that foundational idea.
Mm-hmm.
Mona Delahooke, she advises practitioners to kind of step back a second.
Mm-hmm.
Before rushing into all the techniques and plans, she says the first question has to be, are the child's brain and body experiencing safety?
And crucially, if not, how do we first help the child feel safe? It's about prioritizing that internal state.
Right. And what's really interesting is how Delahooke's felt safety and Hoerricks' idea of softness, they seem to be pointing at the exact same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like they're naming the same frequency, you could say. This state where the nervous system is regulated enough that it can stop just defending itself.
Because communication feels like a risk, doesn't it?
It is a risk, and your body just won't take that risk if it feels under threat, consciously or unconsciously.
And the sources really hammer this home for GLPs. Safety comes before language. It's literally the precursor.
Yeah, and softness isn't presented as some kind of, fluffy aesthetic choice.
No, they call it the technology of survival, which is quite a phrase.
It really is, because if your whole nervous system is basically geared towards defense, that language archive you have might be perfectly intact.
But the door to get to it is just shut.
Exactly. Locked down. And this just flips the usual model,
Totally. It means connection can't just be engineered with rewards or external control.
No, it has to be cultivated through real safety, real attunement. The sources suggest when you prioritize gentleness, language can actually bloom.
But when control is the focus.
It often recedes back into silence.
Okay, so if we take this safety-first idea seriously, it casts a pretty critical eye on what the sources call the false order of technique.
Mm-hmm. That rush towards the charts, the replacement behaviors, the very confident language of compliance we often hear.
We lean on that confidence, I think. Because the system, well, it likes the illusion that you can manage complexity with a checklist, right?
It feels more controllable, more predictable, but this is where the critique gets quite pointed.
Yeah.
The sources describe how this compliance-first logic can become a kind of violence in miniature for gestalt processors.
Violence in miniature. How so?
Well, it's demanding things in the wrong order. It forces sequence before resonance has happened. It demands output before there's attunement.
So it's asking a nervous system that might already be struggling.
Right, maybe with sensory input or just staying regulated.
To perform a behavior that basically signals disconnection is the goal, not connection.
Exactly. And you asked why the system clings to it.
Yeah. If it can be, as they say, violent.
Well, because it's measurable, or at least it appears to be. Traditional systems are really built to reward those linear, measurable steps you can put on a graph.
Okay.
There's this really harrowing personal story in the source material
Oh, yeah.
about someone who was institutionalized, medicated, just terrified. And they were forced to learn, quote, a right string of English phrases. Why? Just to get out.
Wow. So the language wasn't real communication.
Not at all. It was pure mimicry shaped entirely by fear, performance. The words were, as they put it, stripped of resonance.
That really highlights the conflict, doesn't it? These compliance systems, they tend to see focusing on felt safety or softness as, well, getting sidetracked.
Yeah, like it's a distraction, indulgence, or non-compliance. That's the framing.
But The sources are arguing that without that softness, that fundamental
Yeah,
safety...
the bridge just collapses. The connection between feeling, memory, language,
Yeah.
it simply cannot hold.
So the goal accidentally shifts from safety for communication.
To surveillance for compliance. It's a crucial difference.
That shift from just looking at behavior to understanding internal regulation, it feels absolutely key. So let's get into the science a bit. Why is safety so non-negotiable physiologically? What's actually happening?
Okay, yeah. The framework often used here is polyvagal theory. Now, we don't need to get super technical, but basically it explains that safety isn't just a thought like, I am safe. It's a physiological state. It's managed by our autonomic nervous system. Think of it like your body's internal alarm system.
Not a threat detection.
Exactly. And when that system senses threat, and that could be anything from a demanding tone of voice, forced instruction, unpredictability, even just sensory overload, the nervous system automatically, instantly shifts into a protective mode, self-defense.
And what happens when the body goes into that protective mode? What shuts down?
Well, this is crucial. The prefrontal cortex, the sort of thinking brain part we need for higher functions.
Like speech.
Like memory retrieval, creativity, planning. It literally quiets down. It gets deprioritized. Resources go to survival functions.
So it basically goes offline.
Pretty much. For authentic language to even be possible, the nervous system needs to be in a regulated, calm state. When that feeling of safety returns, biologically...
The door reopens.
Exactly. Those higher functions, including language access, come back online.
Okay, so let's connect that specifically to gestalt language processors. How does this softening, this safety, impact their way of processing language, which is often through whole chunks, right? Scripts and patterns.
Right. Remember, for GLPs, language isn't necessarily stored word by word initially. It's stored as living memory.
Living memory.
Yeah, whole phrases, the tones they were said in, the emotions attached, the cadence. It's all bound together.
Okay.
So to access that rich archive in a meaningful way, the system needs to be deeply regulated. Softness, or felt safety, that's in the method. That's how the nervous system gets calm enough to retrieve those stored scripts.
And not just retrieve them like a parrot.
Exactly. Not as rote, meaningless repetition, but as resonance. As these living threads of past experience that they can then start to examine, break down, and weave into new, flexible communication.
Okay. So that's the difference between just mimicking under pressure and actual meaningful language growth.
Precisely. It all comes back to the state of the body, the nervous system, not just the technical output you can measure on a chart.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's a great line in the source that kind of sums it up beautifully. Safety is syntax, regulation is grammar. Without them, language disintegrates into noise.
Wow. Safety is syntax. Regulation is grammar. That's powerful. Now, this focus on, internal coherence and meaning rather than just the outward performance.
Right.
It's not entirely brand new, is it?
No, not at all. It builds on earlier work.
We should probably touch on the historical context here.
Yeah.
Specifically, Prizant's work back in the early 80s.
Yes, absolutely. Prizant was really ahead of his time. He looked at what most people were just dismissing as, meaningless repetition, echolalia.
Right, just copy.
Yeah. And he saw something else. He called it an intelligent echo. He argued it often served a real purpose for the person, maybe self-regulation, maybe rehearsing language chunks.
So he was listening differently. He wasn't just focused on the surface form.
Exactly. He was practicing what the sources call an ethics of listening. Refusing to mistake the form of what was said for the intent behind it, he found coherence in the echo.
And that connects really nicely with Delahooke finding meaning and safety in the silence, doesn't it?
It does. They're both fundamentally arguing that human development isn't mechanical, it's relational. It's about connection and understanding the internal experience.
Okay, so let's contrast that relational view with, what the sources call the analytic supremacy of more traditional behaviorism.
He's right. The behaviorist approach, historically, tends to imagine development only one way.
Like a straight line upwards.
Pretty much. The staircase, the ladder, that linear march from, say, non-vocal to vocal, step by predictable step.
Okay.
And that linear mindset, it's inherently limited when you think about gestalt processing. It operates on this fixed hierarchy. The sources argue that GLP development isn't a ladder, it's more like a spiral.
A spiral. How so?
Meaning emerges through understanding whole patterns first, through memory, through entire phrases, before the person starts analytically breaking down grammar rules.
So behaviorism kind of fixated on climbing that ladder step by step.
It just cannot fathom the spiral. It doesn't fit the model.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting, philosophically and academically. Sort of where the rubber meets the road.
Mm-hmm.
The sources we looked at, they mentioned recent critiques. For example, papers by Hutchins and colleagues and Beals from just 2024.
Right. And those critiques raise concerns, warning that the GLP model maybe lacks a strong empirical foundation.
Yeah, they claim its stages are, quote, unsupported by evidence, and that focusing on it might even risk misleading practitioners.
Okay, so the source material we're drawing from tackles this head-on. They argue that these critiques often rely on a particular kind of rhetoric,
Which,
pointing out that no gold standard trials exist. You know, randomized controlled trials, RCTs.
gold standard of medical research, usually.
Usually. But this raises a really profound ethical question when you apply it here. Think about it. If safety is the absolute precondition for language to emerge naturally in GLPs.
How could you possibly run a gold standard RCT?
Yeah, exactly. The sources argue that to do so, you'd have to create control groups where you deny that essential safety and relational attunement. You'd have to withhold the very thing needed for language to flourish just to control the variables.
That would be,
Well, harmful.
They argue it would be an act of harm. The methodology required by that specific definition of rigor actively sabotages the very outcome you're trying to study.
wow. Huh?
And this is what the source material identifies as epistemic violence.
Epistemic violence. Explain that a bit.
It's the intellectual harm that happens when one dominant way of knowing, one framework, insists that the only valid evidence is what fits its specific tools and measurements.
So it dismisses other forms of knowledge or reality because they don't fit the instruments.
Precisely. Things like softness, resonance, relational attunement, because you can't easily token them, chart them, or reinforce them in a behavioral checklist.
They get dismissed as not real or not measurable, therefore not valid.
Yeah, basically. They're seen as unchartable variables, so they're ignored or devalued in the name of rigor.
So rigor ends up being defined by a system that might be blind to the actual lived experience.
That's the argument. The sources contend that the lived truth for many Gestalt processors is that forcing them to perform disconnection, to comply without safety.
It teaches them not to trust themselves.
Exactly. They stop trusting their own internal signals. They might learn to equate stillness or compliance with success, effectively replacing authentic safety with just surveillance.
The implication there is pretty massive for how we define evidence itself.
It is. It suggests we need to recognize that the observable truth of how these thinkers develop exists, whether or not our current gold standard definitions are flexible enough yet to capture it ethically.
Okay, so if compliance charts and hitting linear milestones aren't the right metric, and we're moving away from things like token boards as the primary tool, what does this look like in practice? How do we track progress if we're prioritizing safety?
Right, that's the key question. The sources propose what they call softness as method.
Softness as method, okay.
It fundamentally shifts the guiding question. Instead of asking, how do we get this output, it asks, what conditions need to exist for this particular child's voice to emerge naturally?
So it's about creating the conditions, not forcing the behavior.
Exactly. It defines effective practice not by external rewards, but by what they term disciplined listening, really tuning in. And there are some powerful examples in the sources.
Like what?
Well, one classroom example. A student who really only used pretty rigid scripts before started writing these incredibly complex creative stories.
And what changed?
The environment shifted. They moved away from demanding data collection on specific outputs and instead focused on co-regulation, on building that felt safety with the student.
So the environmental shift was the intervention,
Yeah.
essentially.
Precisely. And another example. A student described as nonverbal started humming her sentences first, like humming the melody and rhythm of the phrase before she actually spoke the words aloud.
What?
And the source makes a crucial point here. This language was clearly remembered. It was accessed from her existing internal archive once she felt safe enough. It wasn't painstakingly trained through drills.
The safety unlocked what was already there.
That's the idea.
Ah.
So the new metrics for success, they become much subtler, things that often get missed on a compliance chart. Like, eye contact softening, tone shifting, breathing synchronizing between the child and the adult. Tiny shifts in physical regulation.
These are the preludes to language, as the source calls them.
Yes, progress isn't just about more words. It's defined as growing coherence and, crucially, the return of resonance after rupture. Can they come back to connection after a moment of stress or disconnection?
So really, success itself gets redefined.
Completely. The source puts it beautifully. A child scripting from a place of safety isn't failing or stuck. They are already fluent. They're speaking in the key of trust.
Speaking in the key of trust. I like that.
Yes. And this really calls for a whole new standard of literacy, one that actually values pattern, memory, emotional cadence, these hallmarks of gestalt processing as legitimate stages of development.
Instead of seeing them as problems to be fixed through analytic drill.
Right. Instead of forcing the child to abandon who they are to fit our measurement tools. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. It's a really fundamental rethinking of communication, development, and even how we measure progress, isn't it?
It really is.
I think the core takeaway, for me at least, is this necessary shift in focus, moving from the product, the words, the compliance, to listening for the pulse, the underlying rhythm of safety.
Yeah. And the sources suggest this change, this revolution maybe, it isn't going to be loud or, televised or even easily peer-reviewed under current models.
Right. It happens quietly.
It happens quietly. In those moments when someone, a therapist, a teacher, a parent, chooses to just wait, take a breath, and really, truly listen.
It also forces us to rethink what strength looks like, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Softness in this context, it's not about being weak. It's not the absence of strength. The sources frame it as strength being remembered in its natural relational form. It's the discipline, actually, required to listen to the signal that cannot, and frankly should not, be coerced. For these Gestalt minds, safety doesn't just enable language.
Safety is language.
In a fundamental way, yes.
Okay. So our sources argue pretty strongly that safety is the axis, the central point, around which all authentic teaching, all authentic pedagogy really has to turn. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away and think about building on this. Consider a time or a context in your own life, maybe professional, educational, even personal, where you felt pressured to produce some kind of output, some result, before you felt that sense of felt safety.
Yeah.
What might change? What fundamentally shift if you or the people around you applied this discipline of listening in those situations? If process and safety were genuinely honored over just the measurable product, something to think about,